Miers is coming up, and he's going to talk to us about Bolt and privacy-preserving channels.
Hi. So, yeah, thanks for the introduction. So this is a talk on Bolt, which is blind off-chain lightweight transactions. It's how to do payment channels privately. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name's Ian Miers. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Cornell Tech, and more relevantly, one of the creators and co-founders of Zcash. So I'm kind of obsessed with privacy for blockchains. And Bolt is the best way to think about it is it's a privacy-preserving on-ramp to a payment channel network. Right? It's a way to get privacy from the start to the first hop, and then you can do whatever you want in the middle. And I think that this sort of drastically simplifies how you do payment channel networks, because you don't have to deal with concerns necessarily about routing and various other things in the middle of the network. You can basically push it out to the ends and make the jobs of everyone else easier if you get it done right. And Bolt adds strong privacy for payment networks, right? So this contrasts with, for example, Tumblebit, which, while quite impressive, doesn't actually work if the hub and the recipient collude. This, on the other hand, works in all cases. And it does it in a way that hides both the identities of who's being paid and who's sending the payment, and sometimes in the amount. And it does it using standard cryptographic assumptions. So this doesn't involve ZK snarks. It doesn't involve moon math. This is simple stuff that's actually practical and efficient. The overhead is measured in milliseconds and bytes, not megabytes or gigabytes, and seconds to minutes, right? This is not fictive fantasyland academic cryptography. It's actually practical. Right. So we're all familiar with the motivations for payment channels, I think, especially at this conference, but it is useful to back up and think about them abstractly. Because I think if we get lost in the rabbit hole details of blockchains and hash lock transactions and watchtowers and stuff that actually goes into terminology even I don't understand, we will get lost in what we can do, and you want to look at it abstractly. You want to look at it in a sort of an abstract, relatable problem. And the funny thing about payment channels is that problem is actually really simple. It's something all of us have encountered if you've ever tried to buy a drink at a bar. Right? Credit cards have fees. They're a little cumbersome to get, especially if you're coming from the States to Europe, and you have to deal with the fact that they expect chip and PIN, and we have to sign stuff. It's a good way to piss off a bartender in most places. So the workaround to all of this overhead is, of course, the obvious one, which is you open a tab. Right? You amortize the cost of this one expensive payment over a bunch of small ones. Right? And the way this works, if you have trust, obviously, is if the bartender trusts you, you walk in, you make a bunch of purchases, you put it on your tab. At the end of the night, you give them your credit card, and they swipe it. You end up spending 20, 30 euros, 100 if you were at the bar over there last night at 10 euros a beer, and you end up getting a payment. If, on the other hand, the bartender doesn't trust you, you give them your card at the start. You keep putting things at your tab, and at the end of the night, you end up swiping your credit card, getting the bill, or you forget and wake up with that and a nasty bill for leaving your card at the pub. So this is the real-world analogy, right? We have an idea of what's going on here. Of course, blockchains want to do this in a way that's trustless. So what happens? Well, the way you can think about this is sort of exchanging IOUs, right? This is, I think, a good way to view payment channels abstractly, right? So if you want to do this at the start, you don't trust the bartender. What you do is you give Mo, your bartender, $100, and he gives you back an IOU. This happens atomically somehow, for $95 and one beer. The beer cost $5. Right? And assuming you can do this process atomically, now you have an IOU. If you want to buy another beer, you go up, you atomically exchange your IOU for $95 for one for $90, and then end up with another beer, and you keep doing this process throughout the rest of the night. At the end of the night, you have to have some way to cash out the IOU, right? So we need an atomic swap operation, and we need some way to cash out. So how do you do these? Spoilers, the answer is blockchains. The reason for this is, right, the IOU might not work otherwise, but with a blockchain, you're actually assured that your debts will always get paid. Right? This is sort of the way to view it as a trusted third party that will always, in fact, pay its debts. Right? So abstractly, this is the process we want to approximate. Right? And we want to do this in a way that, in my case, because I'm obsessed with privacy and really don't want to build something to generate the next surveillance state, or for in some anarchic thing where we've replaced the state with blockchains, surveillance commons where everyone has access to things, we need to do this in a privacy-preserving manner, right? And this is the familiar thing for payment channels. I think I can skip this for this audience, right? So you can do this between Alice and Bob, between you and your bartender. Of course, you can also do it between a third party. So if you have a bartender and you want to buy something at the food truck across the street, instead of going there and paying them directly, you can actually use your bartender's tab in a way that's trustworthy. This is a payment channel network, and you can broaden this to having multiple hops in between. And this is nice. This is scalable. It avoids all these costs of doing individual payments. But it has some interesting privacy problems, right? So blockchains in general expose every transaction you do to everybody, right? The quip that I got in trouble for about 3 days ago was describing them as it's Twitter for your bank account, right? It broadcasts every transaction detail you do to everybody in the world to do anything they want with them. And payment channels directly don't entirely fix this because you see the aggregate payment flow going through, right? If I open a channel with my psychiatrist, at the end of the year, right, I will have paid them some amount of money. The entire world will see that I had that channel and then it closed for, say, $10,000. They won't know the individual timings of the events or how many payments I made, but they will know the aggregate payment flow, which is enough to tell you that, like, I'm seeing a psychiatrist and have serious mental issues. So you wouldn't want that. Payment channel networks, on the other hand, seem like a better idea, right? If you have a payment channel network, right, I have a payment flow with this provider that's a hub or something, and everyone will know how much money I'm spending with them, but they won't know where it goes after that. So we actually have achieved some measure of privacy. But we've only done it relative to what happens in Bitcoin, where everybody finds out what's going on, right? We still have gotten potentially a centralized third party that, much like Visa, can actually see everything that's going on, right? And this is not really the dream of what we wanted, right? Ecash originally comes out of this work from the 80s, which wanted to make anonymous, privacy-preserving payments, right? Because we were worried about surveillance. And so this is only an improvement in privacy if we move from everybody seeing everything you do, broadcasting your transactions on Twitter, so to speak, back to a centralized model. It's only an improvement. It's not really the dream, right? You want to have privacy for all of this. I mean, these systems, people say they're trustless if you do payment channels, but it's not trustless if you don't have to if you have to trust people not to leak your data, right? This just doesn't work. It's not a viable option. And this is the problem in the centralized case if you end up with just one of these guys, because in the centralized case, you arguably have a worse privacy problem than Bitcoin at some level. In Bitcoin and Ethereum and all of these things, right, you had multiple identities. You effectively had pseudonyms, right, and they were ephemeral. In a centralized Lightning network, a payment channel network, where you have one particular party, your identities are costly, right? To open them, you have to establish a new channel. They're long-lived for the same reason. And the payment hubs, depending on the regulatory environment you end up in, may actually have your real identity, either just because they have your email address and stuff for account recovery, or because there's some KYC, AML framework and process, and they actually have to have that identity for legal reasons, right? And these problems don't go away if you open the channel with just anonymous funds. So you can't just take Zcash, Monero, or whatever, and a centralized system and compose them and get privacy in a meaningful way. This doesn't work out, right? And I think there's a good chance that for economic reasons and UX reasons, you end up with a very centralized set of payment channels, right? This is the risk, and it's one we should plan on in terms of developing technology. Even if you end up in this sort of ideal decentralized system where you don't have a central party, you have some complete mesh of people and it's being routed around, the privacy proposals don't work that well. The main one that I'm familiar with is onion routing, and the idea is that you go through a bunch of hops in the middle. You don't just go through one, as shown here. And somehow or another, if no one colludes, you have some degree of privacy. But the problem is, suppose that the on-ramps that you're using to get onto the network, right? The people who actually have nice UX and a way to onboard users, so like Coinbase and oh man, there really aren't that many people who have good UX in the cryptocurrency space right now. So Coinbase and Coinbase 2, or Gemini or someone, suppose that they are evil and are colluding. The rest of the network in the middle is honest, but those two guys who are the endpoints collude. If Alice makes a payment to Bob for some highly distinguishable amount, it's really easy for them to figure out that this was the payment that happened, even if they don't know what's going on in the middle, because they can just correlate on the payment value and the timing, right? And so this is the problem. And because, and this holds even if you don't know what's going on in the middle, even if you have an arbitrarily privacy-preserving black box, right? Like, this works using, some crazy quantum entanglement, whatever you're going to put in your next pitch deck speech here, right? As long as you have this problem, you're still going to be identified. And because these two parties, Coinbase and Gemini or Coinbase 2 or whoever, have long-term pseudonyms for Alice and Bob, because channels take a while, effectively you get no privacy out of the situation. So what we want to do, and what Bolt does, is actually break this link, and does it in a way that's agnostic to what goes on in the middle. So how do we do this? So I'm going to look at the simplified setting for this particular talk, and then where we just have a single party who we're trying to pay, and our goal is to get privacy so that Sean doesn't know if it's Alice, Andy, or Axe paying them, right? And that's the basic setting. And then you can actually extend this into the full-fledged one we had from earlier. So to do this, we're going to need to basically exchange an IOU worth $100 for one that's worth $95. This is back to the bar tab example, right? And we get a beer out of it too. But to preserve privacy, I can't tell you, you're the bartender, that the original IOU is worth $100, because that would identify me. I can't tell you that the new one's worth $95 for the same reason, and I can't even show you the IOU because, again, it's uniquely identifiable. And yet somehow I'm going to have to prove to you that I really do have an IOU, and that it really is worth $5 less than the last one I have. That's how I prove that I paid for the beer. And here's the fun part. That's not even the hard part about doing this. This is actually the simple bit, right? And so how do we do this? Well, you're going to need 3 tools. You're going to need a blockchain. You're going to need commitments. You can think of these as like opaque envelopes that hide data and prevent people from tampering with it. And you're going to need simple, again, not ZK snarks, not moon math, zero-knowledge proofs. These allow you to prove statements about the contents of commitments. And so with these tools, what do? Well, we're going to construct a privacy-preserving IOU. And the IOU is going to be a commitment to effectively the customer's balance, right, the guy purchasing the beer, and to the merchant's balance, right, this is the balance of the channels, and a particular thing which we're going to call a revocation key, which is used to cause the IOU to later expire, right? We're going to, at some point, have to exchange IOU for 100 for an IOU for 95, and we're going to use the revocation key to make sure that when we do that, the one for 100 is actually expired. Right? And then finally, we're going to have, as in a physical real IOU, a signature, in this case a digital signature with a cryptographic key, not a physical one, a signature by the merchant saying this is a legit IOU, you really did open a tab with me, right? There really is a channel that we invoked for establishment. Right? So, makes sense? Sort of take the expected cryptographic tools, shove the data you need into them, and mix a little bit, and voila. Right, so given that, we now have this commitment. The cool thing is we can prove things about the commitment in zero knowledge, right? And so we can prove that we have such a commitment and that it's signed, right? And if we have 2 of them, we can say that one of them is signed, and here is a new one, which is worth $5 less, i.e. it pays you for the $5 in beer, and we're going to ask you to sign this one, right? And you're going to know that, well, you don't know what's going on, but you know that actually you got $5 out of the relationship. And that is, in fact, sort of the core of the protocol. So this allows us to move from a setting in where ordinarily, in a normal payment channel, you'd do the same dance, but you'd actually show the IOU to the merchant, say, here's the existing channel balance that you signed and said is valid. Here's the new one. Please sign the state transition. Right? That's the do it in the clear, expose everything, simple. Right? Simple apple pie basic approach. Using zero-knowledge proofs and some basic cryptographic magic, we change to an exchange that looks like this, where there's a proof that there exists a previous IOU and that it was valid and signed, and then we ask the merchant to sign the new one to validate the new state transition. But we don't ever tell them what the previous state was. We just show that it obeyed the rules that we agreed to. Right? So this is the cryptographic magic trick. And again, this is simple zero-knowledge proofs. We're not talking about snarks. We're not talking about moon math. This is going to end up being done with Sigma protocols. Right? So I said that was the easy part, right? The hard part is how do we do this atomic swap? We've got to exchange between the old IOU and the new IOU. And the trick is that both of these things can't be valid at the same time. Right? If Alice invalidates the old IOU, right, this one, before she gets the new one, then, well, this was for $100, and now it's not, and so she just lost the money. There's no new one she can cash out at the end of the night. That doesn't work. Right? On the other hand, if Bob issues the new one for 95 before this one is invalid, Alice is now holding 100 and then one for 95, and woo, free money. Also doesn't work. So you need to do this atomically. And seemingly, this means you need to do an atomic swap between states. And this is a fair exchange of signatures. And these are actually known to be mathematically impossible without trusted third parties. And so we don't really want to try to do that. So what we do instead is we note that there's actually a distinction between these two IOUs in this state, right? They serve two different purposes. One thing that the IOU does is it's a way to cash out at the end of the night, right? When your bar tab's over, when your night's over, you're too hungover, you don't want to keep drinking, you've got to give your talk in the morning, so last night, you can use it to go get your money back, right? That's to close out and cash out the channel. Right? The second thing you have is a capability to make new purchases, right? And these two things are distinct, and you can actually remove one ability while not removing the other. And so that's exactly what we're going to do, right? Alice can safely give up her ability to buy more using the IOU, right? She has the one for $95 that can be used to buy another beer, and she says, well, it's no longer valid for buying a new beer. I mean, she might be sad she can't get more beer, but she'll still get her money back. On the flip side, Bob can safely sign a new IOU for $95 if he does it in a very particular way, even if Alice holds this other one, because until he actually gives Alice her beer, she hasn't actually gotten anything of value from her. If you constrain both of these so you can't literally cash out $195, you can only cash out one or the other, the state transition is fine. And so this is the approach we're actually going to use. And with that, the actual protocol becomes pretty simple. You start with an existing balance that you've established for, say, $100. And Alice proves to Bob, the bartender, that she has such a balance, and that there was a new one which pays her $5 less, pays him $5 more. So this is 0, 100. This is 5, 95. Right? So you prove that those exist. And you have to reveal a unique identifier, the revocation key of this transaction. This is to prevent replays. So this is move one of the protocol, right? And basically, you do this proof, you reveal this, you hand it to the merchant, and you say, here's the old proof that the old state is valid. Please sign the new state transition. And Bob, the merchant, validates all of this and says, OK, I will sign your new state transmission state as being valid for spending new beers, but not yet as valid for cashing out. And then we will, after that's done, after it's safe, and now Alice has this IOU that she can use to get her money at the end of the night, she will actually revoke the previous state by signing it using this identifier she revealed. Right? Now the old IOU is dead, and now Bob can safely sign the new IOU as being useful for continuing on in this transaction process, not just signing out. Right? And so this is disk cryptography, and this, you can flipping ahead a little bit, when you go to doing a payment channel network, when you want to make multiple of these payments conditional on each other, so Alice can pay Bob, you can pay Charlie, you can pay David, right? Standard PCN. This is the bit you make conditional, and you do it via, say, a standard hash lock transaction or something, right? Before this, the protocol hasn't really executed. After this, the protocol has executed. And so if you make that message, this is revoked, conditioned on something else happening, this is how you get an actual payment channel network out of it. So this is the basic approach. Right? Simple set of protocols. We actually implemented this. You can use a variety of approaches to get it to work. There are a bunch of different choices in the cryptographic literature. If you really wanted to, if you were in love with moon math and wanted really tiny transactions, you could use snarks, but you don't need to. It has a one-time setup to establish a channel. This takes somewhere between 1 to 2 seconds for like prototype Python code. This is not like a trusted setup thing. The merchant's the one doing the setup. There's no third party who needs to be trusted. The payments take less than 100 milliseconds per hop, and actually, I think, way less, because optimized versions, didn't finish this slide last night, thanks for the beer. Optimized versions of this, I was talking to Henry Davalance at Chain, probably get this down to like 10 milliseconds, we think, but it's not clear. My Python code was very slow. So anyway, it's like 100 milliseconds per hop to do a payment, probably actually a lot less if you put some effort into optimizing it. And this is secure under, depending on what you use, a variety of assumptions, but the most conservative choice is discrete log DDH, right? So this is no worse than bulletproofs in terms of assumptions, and actually a fair bit faster and smaller because we're not trying to do something quite as complex. Right. So as I said, you can extend this to do payment channel networks pretty easily, which doesn't actually involve cryptography. If you do this, you end up with a property where you will hide the identities of who's making the payments, but you won't necessarily hide the balances, because if you have a sequence of transactions where there's a third party, two third parties in the middle, somehow those two people have to know how much money they have between them, and so they can just look, Before this went through, the balance was $50 me, $20 you, and now it's $45 me, $25 you, and like, oh, that was probably a payment for $5. There's no real way to cryptographically get around that. Second of all, you can do payment channels for things beyond, state channels for things beyond money, right? Effectively, we're proving a valid state transition with a zero-knowledge proof. It doesn't have to simply be, A plus B equals C. You can enforce anything you want. And you can actually remove any type of exotic cryptography from the blockchain to get this to work by adding an extra round trip to the protocol. Then the on-chain protocol only has to validate classic signatures. This is actually deployable via a soft fork in Zcash or Bitcoin. It simply requires a new opcode. If you do this in Bitcoin, you do need some way to anonymize the starting funds. You use like CoinJoin something or whatever, because one caveat with this protocol is that there are abort conditions, where if we abort a payment channel, it's possible to link that abort to the funding transaction. And so the way to get around that is just make sure that the funding transaction was sufficiently anonymous. In fact, you can do this via routing it through another payment channel network that's anonymous. So you could use Bolt to set up a Bolt channel. Right. So this is currently in the process of very slowly being developed and deployed. The Zcash Foundation is actually funding development. The core cryptographic library is in the process of being constructed, and the project will be open source. I say will be because a while ago I learned a lesson about putting up prototype code online, where some people took it, made their own cryptocurrency, disregarded the very long warning that was in the code, actually copied it into the repo, and then got like, I don't know, $50 million stolen. So you put it up when it's ready. Yeah, that's Bolt. The goal is to actually get privacy by breaking the link between your on point to a payment channel network and the point at which you exit, and then allow you to do whatever you want in the middle. And with that, I will take questions.
Awesome, fantastic talk. Yep, I see a question immediately over there.
Hi. I have a question. Maybe I missed it. About how you anonymize the starting funds in Ethereum, and also if you anonymize the sender of the deltas afterwards.
So for the first one, you need one of the standard tools to do anonymity for actual on-chain payments. In my particular case, I'd say use Zcash. I might be a bit of a Zcash shill.
Which writes the sender too, right?
The sender? So when you establish the channel, whatever funds you put into the channel, you should put in they should be anonymous.
Okay.
Right? And then the second question I didn't quite parse.
So what prevents the merchant from tracking all the deltas coming from the same, even physical address, and then?
Oh, you don't learn the address. All you learn is that someone paid you this amount, and you notice that someone who has a channel open with you.
All the hopes.
So it could be anybody.
Okay.
Right?
Any more questions?
I think there's one there.
Okay, awesome. There you go.
And there's one back there.
I was wondering, do you use commitments in the IOU?
Yeah, it's a Peterson commitment.
So do you need to open the commitment in the end?
Yeah.
So what prevents the customer from not disclosing the commitment?
So when you establish the channel, right, you're going to need to have a timeout policy. And basically, what happens is the merchant can just say, look, I'm taking all the funds. You have a week, a day, whatever you set up for the parameters, to produce a commitment that says I'm not supposed to have all the funds. Yeah. And then the onus is on the customer.
But you just said the merchant doesn't know which customer actually paid.
Right.
Then how can the merchant actually decide which accounts, which money to take away?
He doesn't have to. He basically just does a call of like, look, I'm going to start closing out channels because I need my capital, right? And everyone now has to close them, right? So he can keep them floating as long as he wants, and then he can decide to close individual channels to recoup whatever funds he has. It's a bit ambiguous. He doesn't know which funds, how much he's going to get out when he initiates that process.
Okay, yeah.
But he will get his money. And then there was a question back there.
It's down here, wasn't it?
Maybe I missed this, but what's your timeline on this?
It's a good question.
Okay.
I mean, the core cryptographic protocol is a library we just finished the first prototype that's like meant to be production deployable. The actual details on how to do the payment channel itself and all the UX and stuff are a while later, but it's an open project. If anyone wants to collaborate on it, you want to deploy it on your own blockchain and not in Zcash, please do talk to me or IO or someone else at the foundation. It's not meant to be like exclusive.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you very much. A round of applause for Ian. That was awesome.